So the torque wrench is one of those tools which, as a bike nerd, you sort of lust after. Finally, getting a torque wrench means you've achieved some sort of bike nerdiness or are getting serious about your home mechanic skills. Over the last couple of months, I have been testing a variety of torque wrenches, everything from torque wrenches that you would take with you on the trail to torque wrenches that you would use at your home shop, and some pretty interesting ones in between. In this video, I'm going to share my thoughts after using all these torque wrenches. Which ones did I use the most, which ones I used the least, and which might be the best fit for you. So first off, why would you need a torque wrench? I think the first big obvious reason is that if you're working at a shop and you're constantly handling very expensive parts with very specific torque values, then a torque wrench makes absolute sense. I think I would also add that a torque wrench is a great tool for a beginner who's just starting to wrench on their bike. If you don't have that experience of working on your bike, a torque wrench is a good way to learn how much is too much torque and how much is not enough torque. Here on the YouTube channel, I'm the first to admit I am not the best mechanic, and I'm constantly afraid of stripping bolts on my bike. So a torque wrench gives me the peace of mind of getting things tight enough so they don't fall off while I'm riding, but not so tight that I'm gonna cause some irreparable damage. So even as a pretty mediocre mechanic, I think there is some value to the torque wrench. That said, not all torque wrenches are the same. Each has their individual quirks as well as, more added accessories. Before I go any further, full disclosure, Park Tool sent over all these torque wrenches, as did Topeak, so I can make this content for you. No one needs this many torque wrenches, so I will be giving a vast majority of these away on our Patreon. One more thing before we go into the overhead cam. There are a couple limitations to this video, and I am making a couple of assumptions. First big limitation is there is a wide variety of torque wrenches. I didn't get to test them all, but I do feel like this is fairly representative of the different styles of torque wrenches you'll see. Secondly, I am making the assumption that these torque wrenches are calibrated within spec. I don't really have the tools or apparatus to make sure that these torque wrenches were calibrated to spec, so I'm taking that leap of faith and trusting these brands. I will point you towards a video by our friend Nolan over at Bike Sauce where he tests the accuracy of some torque wrenches, and he also has another great video on how to properly use a torque wrench. Turns out where you hold the torque wrench on the handle affects how much torque you're actually applying. So if you choke it up too high, it's not going to give you the correct torque that you're hoping to achieve, as well as if you're holding it at the very tip, you want to be right in the sweet spot of each torque wrench. All right, with all that aside, let's jump to the overhead cam. So the first class of torque wrench I want to look at is the kind of portable trailside torque wrench that you would bring with you on a ride. I'm going to look at these two, one from Silca and one from Topeak first, because they are the most similar. This is the Topeak Ratchet Rocket Lite and TX Plus, and this is the Silca ratchet set with the torque functionality to it. Right off the bat, you can see that they're pretty similar. They have their assortment of bits. Topeak does have the additional chain breaker tool. For some people, that may be super important. For me, it's not as much of a deal breaker. I actually bring a separate chain breaker tool. They both function the same insofar as they have a ratcheting mechanism here. The Topeak one is a lot lighter and a lot more simple. The Silca one is pretty interesting because depending on where you're trying to wrench on the bike, you can transform it to fit. So for example, let's say you had to get into a tight spot where the handle was too long. You could shorten it and use it this way. Or let's say you're trying to hit a bolt where it's kind of recessed or there are things in the way like a bottle cage. You could set up the ratchet this way and get to it. In terms of versatility and getting into super tight spaces, the Silca wins in this instance. If you look at the actual torque tool of the Silca, you can see that it does have markings, but they're really small and close together. And depending on which value you're trying to reach, you kind of rotate it until you hit the grade that best illustrates that value. While functional, not the easiest to read for me, and you do have to kind of position which graduated scale you want to use. Let's compare that with the Topeak. It has one scale, but it's very easy to use. It goes all the way from 0 to 8 Newton meters. The Silca also goes from 0 to 8, but again, I think the scale on the Topeak is so much easier to read. It does make this chonkier, so I think if you want the absolute lightest, feltest thing, then go for the Silca. If you want the easiest to read, probably easier to use, then go with the Topeak. I think the best combo would be the Topeak torque add-on with the Silca wrench. To somehow, made a baby, it would be the perfect trail torque wrench. Next torque wrench is another one from Topeak. It is the Nano Torque DX. So this kind of takes the concept of individual torque keys and combines it into like a stick form factor. The bits and the preset keys come in this cool little lunchbox looking thing. This opens up to reveal the predetermined torque keys as well as some bits. I somehow managed to lose 2 of the bits. I don't know how. This is supposed to be super secure, but yeah. So these are preset for 4, 5, and 6. Pretty common values, things that you would use around your seat post or working on the stem or even tightening down the cable bolts. So the way that this would work is you would attach the torque value that you want to hit into the key. You would take the bit, plug it in there, and then do your thing. I love the concept of this, but it does have a couple of flaws. So in tightening things down, there is like the slightest click that you have to listen to, and I think it's a little bit too easy to not hear the click and keep torquing down. Also, as I learned recently, depending on where you hold the torque wrench, that will change the actual torque you're applying. So do you hold it up here? Do you grab it by the fistful, or do you hold it back here? There's no real guidance on the tool itself to ensure that you're holding it at the right spot to give the correct given torque. Probably my least favorite thing about this design is that you've got 2 separate pieces. I wish there was a way that these would connect. It's way too easy, in my opinion, to kind of misplace these or keep track of 2 things. Topeak Nano Torque Bar DX, great concept, but I think it could use a little bit more refinement. We're leaving the trail for now and are looking at kind of more home-based or shop-based torque wrenches. This is the Park Tool ATD 1.2. Bit of a spoiler alert, but this is the tool. This is the torque wrench that I gravitated to the most. It doesn't have the biggest range, not the most fine adjustability, but it was definitely the most convenient one to use. It goes from 4 to 4, 5, 5, 5, 5, and 6. So it doesn't quite get to 8, but most things I'm torquing down are usually within that 4 to 6 range. Nice trick it has up its sleeve is that it stores its bits in itself. So I believe it has a 345 as well as a T25. So the most common bits that I would use. And the way that you would use it is, you put your torque value, put your bit in here, and you twist it. You hear a really loud audible click when you've hit that torque value you want. The tool itself gives you kind of guidance on how to hold it to make sure you're applying the right torque, which is kind of nice. So really hard to mess this one up and super quick and easy to use. Highly recommend this. Next up are the 2 torque wrenches that really started me on this journey, and they are by Park. They are the TW 5.2 and the TW 6.2. They work functionally the same. You would put your bit here, you would dial in your torque value, read your desired setting through the window, and when you hit that torque value, it clicks and the head kind of does a little wobble, and you know that you've hit your desired torque value. So these 2 torque wrenches are the ones that I thought I would gravitate to the most. I think as a beginning bike nerd, it's fun to use a tool where you can adjust it and all these geeky things. But in actual practice, these are the ones I use the least. A couple things to note about these torque wrenches is, they don't really work by themselves. You do have to get a slate of bits for these torque wrenches to be functional. Definitely something to factor in your budget. I'll talk about which one of these I use the most day to day. What were the things that kind of detracted me from using these more often? The first one was the act of dialing in the desired torque, but also remembering to zero it out when not in use. These torque wrenches come calibrated and they're not indestructible. You can get them out of calibration, and one good way to do that is to not reset their values to 0 after each use. In a little piece of paper it comes with the torque wrenches, they don't really give you any guidance in terms of how to calibrate it. In fact, they suggest sending it back to Park for them to calibrate it for a small fee. So to me, that's a little bit of a negative, having to remember to zero it out and having no way to calibrate it at home. I do love how they feel when you're using them. It's a very definite click and flop of the head, so you know that you've hit that desired torque value and you're not going to go over it. But those quirks of needing to send it to Park to calibrate, as well as to remember to zero it out, made it so that I reach for other torque wrenches before I reached for this one. And that brings us to these guys. This is the Park Wrench TW 2.2 and the 1.2. These two torque wrenches function very similarly to these ones. I think their scales are identical in the larger ones and the smaller ones. These are, I believe, called split beam torque wrenches, and you can kind of see where that gets its name from. The way these work is you would put your bit, you would apply the torque, and the arrow would bend and show you the torque setting that you are reaching. It's got a nice and big clear scale that is always ready to go. You don't have to dial in what torque value you're looking for. You just start using the tool and read off the scale. Another big advantage to this one is that you don't have to remember to zero it. But with this, it just resets itself. So in some ways, a little bit more dummy proof. Another nice thing about the split beam torque wrenches is Park Tool does give you some guidance if the torque wrench gets out of calibration. And it's pretty easy to tell when that happens because the arrow won't line up at zero. And they simply tell you to bend this beam of the split beam to get it back to zero. So at home, you could use or calibrate this if it became uncalibrated. Another thing to keep in mind, just like the click style, you do have to buy the assortment of bits to make this functional. So out of the box, it's going to be pretty useless unless you get the related bits. So interestingly, the click style ones are the ones that got me interested in using a torque wrench, but the split beam ones are the ones I found myself using more often. Didn't have to dial any knobs, didn't have to remember to zero it out. Let's talk about the bits for a second. Which ones do I find myself using the most? For most around the home tasks, I found myself using the 345 and T25 the most. For other tasks, the two bits I found using the most were actually this guy. This is the 1-inch hex, and I would pair that with something like this to remove cassette rings, or to tighten cassette rings rather. Again, all these torque wrenches, you only want to tighten and not loosen. I found that I use this combination about 90% of the time when I was gravitating towards this, as well as a bottom bracket tool, mostly to secure the lock rings on disc brakes. Constantly swapping out wheels. These two parts pretty much cover about, I'd say 90% of the tasks that I use a torque wrench with in larger applications. All right, almost done. And I think we're gonna close it off with this interesting one by Topeak. It's their torque stick. And what's neat about this is that it combines a shop level tool, but makes it super portable. So unlike the other Topeak where you had two different things to carry, these are the bits and this is the torque wrench, and they click together very conveniently. Also, unlike a shop tool where you have to buy separate attachments, you simply take this piece, slide it open, and it gives you access to your bits. But for the small bolts on your bike, you pull out of the bit, you pull it, you put it in the head here. Just like the Park click style wrenches, you would dial in the torque, pulling this bottom part out until you get to your desired torque value, do your torquing, and then pull it out, and again, reset it to zero. I think if you need the granularity of a wrench like this, but want it all in one, a lot smaller, something you can travel with, then this torque stick by Topeak is a great option. Again, I love that it comes with the bits. You don't have to buy it separately. It's not an added expense. It's all there ready to go. A big plus compared to this is that this snaps together. One tidy package. Also, when this clicks, it's really obvious, unlike this guy. Well, that was a lot of torque wrenches. Hopefully this video helped you out in trying to figure out which one is the best for you. Again, my assumptions changed about which one I thought I would use the most. If you found this video helpful or entertaining, please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. You keep content like this coming. You're also privy to some really cool giveaways and contests that we do there. If that's too much commitment, consider buying a stem cap from our web store. Couple days left before we shut it down for the holidays, so you don't want to miss out on that. And as always, keep the supple side down.